The Utah desert stretched endlessly under a merciless sun as Nathaniel Nate Blackwood crawled through the alkali dust, his left leg twisted at an unnatural angle, his lips cracked and bleeding from thirst. At 55, the former railroad engineer had survived 3 train wrecks, countless Indian raids, and the slow death of the steam age. But he'd never expected to be beaten senseless and left for dead by his own crew. Betrayed for the crime of refusing to look the other way when they started robbing passengers. The pain in his leg pulsed with each heartbeat, a constant reminder of his predicament. Sweat trickled down his weathered face, stinging his eyes and mingling with the blood from a gash above his right eyebrow. His once pristine uniform, a source of pride throughout his decades of service, now hung in tatters, stained with blood and grime. "You're too old-fashioned, Blackwood." His fireman Pete Kowalski had sneered as the other men worked him over with wrenches and coupling pins. "This railroad business ain't about honor anymore. It's about taking what you can get while the getting's good." Kowalski's face had twisted with contempt, his youthful features hardened by greed. The man had been Nate's apprentice once, eager to learn the intricacies of the great iron beasts that conquered the West. Now at 30, Kowalski had abandoned the principles Nate had tried to instill in him, choosing instead the quick rewards of theft and corruption. The getting had been a systematic scheme to rob wealthy passengers during routine stops, splitting the take with corrupt conductors and bribed officials. When Nate discovered the operation and threatened to report it, his own crew had decided that a tragic accident would solve their problem permanently. "Should have minded your own business, old man," Kowalski had laughed as they dumped Nate beside the tracks in the middle of nowhere. "Maybe the buzzards will have better use for you than the railroad did." The memory of their laughter echoed in Nate's mind as he dragged himself forward. Each movement sent shards of agony through his broken body. The sun beat down relentlessly, turning the landscape into a shimmering mirage of heat and dust. Twice he'd passed out, only to awaken to the same hellish reality, alone, injured, and miles from civilization. Now Nate dragged himself through the sage and greasewood, his broken leg leaving a trail of blood in the sand. In the distance, he spotted a cluster of adobe buildings nestled against a red sandstone mesa, the first sign of civilization he'd seen since regaining consciousness. The sight gave him renewed strength, though each yard felt like a mile. The settlement was barely more than a wide spot in the desert, a trading post, a blacksmith shop, and a few scattered dwellings that looked like they'd been carved from the rock itself. A wooden sign, weathered by years of sun and wind, proclaimed, "Thunder Mesa Trading Company," in faded letters. The buildings seemed to shimmer in the heat, their adobe walls blending with the red earth beneath them. Nate collapsed in the shade of the trading post's porch, his vision blurring from pain and dehydration. The rough-hewn planks felt cool against his cheek, a small mercy in his desperate state. He tried to call out, but his parched throat produced only a raspy whisper. The door opened to reveal a woman in her early 40s, her dark hair streaked with silver, her olive skin marking her as Mexican, or perhaps part Indian. She wore practical frontier clothes, a simple blouse and skirt of sturdy cotton with a leather vest that had seen years of use. She moved with the fluid grace of someone equally comfortable in the saddle or behind a counter, her posture straight and proud, despite the hardships etched in the fine lines around her eyes. "Dios mío," she breathed, kneeling beside him. "What happened to you, senor?" Her voice carried the musical cadence of her heritage, though her English was flawless. She smelled of sage, coffee, and the faint sweetness of mesquite honey, the sense of home and safety in this harsh land. "Train, crew," Nate gasped through swollen lips, "left me to die." The woman's dark eyes widened, then narrowed with determination. Without hesitation, she slipped her arms beneath his shoulders and helped him to sit up. Despite her slender frame, she possessed surprising strength, the kind that came from years of self-reliance in a land that showed no mercy to the weak. "Can you stand with help?" she asked, her tone practical rather than pitying. Nate nodded weakly, and together they managed to get him upright. Pain lanced through his broken leg, but the woman supported his weight with practiced efficiency, guiding him through the doorway and into the cool interior of the trading post. The woman, he'd later learn her name was Elena Vasquez, helped him inside without hesitation. Her trading post was well stocked and organized, with goods ranging from basic supplies to fine Mexican silver and Indian pottery. Shelves lined the walls, filled with canned goods, tools, ammunition, and medicines. Colorful Navajo blankets hung from the rafters, while glass cases displayed more valuable items, jewelry, watches, and small luxuries that brought civilization to the frontier. She eased him onto a narrow cot in a back room that served as both storeroom and living quarters. The space was small but meticulously clean, with a small cooking stove, a washstand, and a few pieces of simple furniture. A rifle stood in one corner, well-maintained and ready for use. "Your own crew did this?" she asked, examining his injuries with practiced hands. Her touch was gentle but thorough as she assessed the damage to his leg, ribs, and face. "Caught them, robbing passengers. Didn't like my interference." Elena's dark eyes hardened with recognition. She'd seen this kind of beating before, the methodical brutality of men who believed their cause justified any cruelty. "Bastardos," she muttered, switching to Spanish. "They left you for the desert to finish." She worked efficiently, cutting away his tattered clothing, cleaning his wounds with water and whiskey, and setting his broken leg with splints fashioned from wooden slats. Her movements revealed years of experience treating injuries far from doctors or hospitals. "The leg is bad," she said frankly. "It will heal, but you may always walk with a limp. The ribs are cracked, not broken through. You are lucky they did not puncture your lungs." Nate managed a pained smile. "Lucky isn't the word I'd choose." "You survived," Elena replied simply. "In this country, that is luck enough." For 2 weeks, Nate drifted between consciousness and fever, while Elena tended his wounds with a mixture of frontier medicine and traditional remedies passed down from her grandmother. She brewed teas from desert herbs to fight infection, applied poultices of clay and sage to draw out inflammation, and kept his broken leg immobilized with expertly crafted splints. During his lucid moments, Nate observed her running the trading post with quiet efficiency. She bargained with Mormon settlers from the north, Mexican traders from the south, and various Indian tribes who brought pelts, blankets, and pottery to exchange for manufactured goods. She spoke to each in their own language or dialect, adapting her manner to suit their customs while maintaining her dignity and authority. Her touch was gentle but sure, and she worked with the confidence of someone who'd patched up plenty of injuries over the years. Sometimes she sang softly in Spanish as she changed his bandages, old songs that spoke of love, loss, and endurance. The melodies seemed to float in the air like dust motes in the sunlight that streamed through the small window. When Nate finally sat up without the world spinning, he found Elena negotiating with a group of Apache traders, conducting business in a mixture of Spanish, English, and sign language. The Apache men, tall, stern-faced warriors with eagle feathers in their hair, treated her with obvious respect, accepting her terms without the aggressive haggling they might have employed with others. She handled the transaction with the skill of someone who understood that survival in the desert required maintaining good relationships with all the local powers. After the traders departed with coffee, ammunition, and metal tools, Elena carefully examined the deer skins, turquoise, and medicinal herbs they'd left in exchange. "You speak Apache?" he asked after the traders had departed, genuinely impressed. Few whites bothered to learn native languages, preferring to force Indians to communicate on their terms. "I speak whatever keeps me alive out here," Elena replied, counting the silver coins she'd received for a shipment of blankets. "A woman alone in this country needs every advantage she can get." She moved to a large ledger on her counter, recording the transaction in neat, precise handwriting. Nate noticed that she kept her books with the same meticulous care she applied to everything else, each entry dated, described, and balanced against expenses. "How long have you been here?" he asked, testing his weight on his injured leg. It held, though pain shot up his thigh when he put too much pressure on it. 7 years at Thunder Mesa," she replied, not looking up from her ledger. "Before that, I was at a ranch near Santa Fe." Her story emerged slowly over the following days. Elena had been married to a wealthy rancher who died in an Apache raid, leaving her with debts and enemies who wanted her land. Rather than remarry or flee, she'd sold the ranch and used the money to establish this trading post, turning it into the most successful business between Salt Lake City and Santa Fe. My husband was a good man, she explained one evening as they shared a simple meal of beans, cornbread, and coffee. But he never taught me about the business. When he died, the vultures circled. His brother, the bank, men who thought a widow should be desperate enough to sell cheap or marry quick. She poured more coffee into Nate's cup, the aroma rich and comforting in the small room. Outside, the desert night had fallen, bringing a profound silence broken only by the occasional cry of a coyote. Men think a Mexican woman can't run a place like this, she continued, organizing her inventory with military precision. They're wrong. We understand survival better than most. We've had to. Nate nodded, understanding all too well how quickly people could be dismissed based on assumptions about their capabilities. The railroad was the same, he said. 30 years I gave them, and in the end they were ready to replace me with younger men who cut corners and broke rules. He told her about the railroad corruption, the crew's betrayal, the years of honest service repaid with treachery. Elena listened without judgment, occasionally nodding as if she'd heard similar stories before. Her eyes, dark and thoughtful, reflected the lamplight as she absorbed his tale. This Pete Kowalski, she said finally. He thinks being young and ruthless makes him smart. He thinks I'm a relic, useless baggage from a more honorable time. Maybe he's right about one thing, Elena said, her tone thoughtful. Maybe that time is finished. Question is, what are you going to do about it? The question hung between them, challenging and profound. Nate had spent his recovery focused on survival, not vengeance or justice. Now, as his strength returned, he found himself considering possibilities beyond mere existence. I don't know, he admitted. I've been a railroad man my whole life. Don't know if I'm fit for anything else at my age. Elena's smile was small but genuine. Perhaps it's time to find out. Their partnership began when a stagecoach arrived carrying passengers who'd been robbed by Kowalski's crew. The victims were desperate, stranded without money or supplies, and the nearest law was 3 days' ride away. Among them was a young mother with 2 small children, a businessman whose papers had been stolen along with his money, and an elderly couple traveling to visit their son in California. Nate recognized the modus operandi immediately. The specific items taken, the location of the robbery, even the threats used matched Kowalski's methods. The passengers had been left with just enough to survive, but not enough to continue their journey or seek justice. Nate's knowledge of railroad operations and Elena's business connections allowed them to provide help that went beyond simple charity. Elena extended credit to the passengers, while Nate used his contacts among honest railroad workers to send telegrams to their destinations, arranging for funds to be waiting at the next major stop. You know these routes better than anyone, Elena observed as they planned a way to get the passengers safely to their destination. She spread a map across her counter, tracing potential paths with her finger. 30 years on the rails teaches you things, Nate replied, leaning over the map. Where the water stops are, which passes are safe, how to read the signs that trouble's coming. Together, they arranged for the stagecoach to take an alternate route that would bypass Kowalski's likely ambush points. Nate drew detailed maps, marking safe houses and reliable water sources, while Elena provided supplies and letters of credit that would be honored by her trading partners along the way. The passengers departed 2 days later, grateful and considerably safer than when they'd arrived. As the stagecoach disappeared in a cloud of dust, Elena turned to Nate with a speculative look. We did good work, she said simply. We did, Nate agreed, surprised by the satisfaction he felt. It was different from the pride he'd taken in running a train on schedule, but no less rewarding. Word spread through the territory about the trading post at Thunder Mesa, where Elena Vasquez and the old railroad man could solve problems that stumped territorial authorities. Travelers began to seek them out, not just for supplies, but for information, protection, and occasionally justice when official channels failed. They developed a reputation for fairness that extended from the Mormon settlements to the Mexican border. Elena's connections with various tribes and trading partners provided intelligence about outlaw movements and dangerous areas, while Nate's railroad knowledge helped travelers navigate the increasingly complex transportation networks of the expanding West. More importantly, they found in each other something they'd both thought lost: companionship, respect, and the slow-burning warmth of mature love built on shared struggles and mutual admiration. Their relationship developed gradually, beginning with practical cooperation and deepening into genuine affection. Nate found himself admiring Elena's resilience, her sharp mind, and her unwavering integrity. She, in turn, appreciated his patience, his encyclopedic knowledge of the territory, and his old-fashioned courtesy that never slipped into condescension. They were partners in the truest sense, equals despite their different backgrounds and experiences. The confrontation with Kowalski's crew came 6 months later. They arrived on a special train, claiming to be investigating reports of stolen railroad property at Elena's trading post. But Nate recognized the real purpose. They'd come to finish what they'd started in the desert. The train whistle echoed across the mesa as it approached, a sound that had once represented home and purpose to Nate. Now it heralded danger. He and Elena had prepared for this possibility, knowing that Kowalski's greed and vindictiveness would eventually lead him to Thunder Mesa. Well, Kowalski called out as he stepped off the train with 5 armed men. If it ain't old Blackwood still breathing when he should be feeding the worms. Kowalski had grown more prosperous in the intervening months. His clothes were expensive, his boots polished to a high shine, and a gold watch chain dangled across his vest. But his eyes remained cold and calculating. The eyes of a predator assessing potential prey. Nate emerged from the trading post, no longer the broken man they'd left for dead. Hard work and purpose had strengthened his body, while finding his true calling had restored his spirit. His broken leg had healed crooked, leaving him with a permanent limp, but his eyes were clear and his hands steady. "Pete," he said calmly, "you're looking prosperous. The robbery business treating you well?" Kowalski's smile faltered slightly at Nate's composure. He'd expected to find a crippled, bitter old man, not this confident figure who regarded him with something close to pity. "Don't get smart with me, old man. We're here on official railroad business." "Official?" Elena stepped out beside Nate, a shotgun cradled in her arms. The weapon wasn't aimed directly at the men, but her grip made it clear she could bring it to bear in an instant. "Funny thing about that. I sent some telegrams to friends in Denver and Salt Lake City. Seems the railroad's been looking for you boys for quite some time." Kowalski's confidence wavered as he realized they'd walked into a trap. Elena's friends included federal marshals, territorial judges, and railroad executives who'd grown tired of the corruption plaguing their lines. For months, she and Nate had been gathering evidence, collecting testimonies from robbery victims, and building a case against Kowalski's operation. "This is a setup," one of Kowalski's men muttered, his hand drifting toward his gun. "No," came a new voice from behind them. "This is justice." A federal marshal stepped off the train's rear car, flanked by railroad detectives and territorial lawmen. They'd been tracking Kowalski's crew for months, following a trail of robberies and murdered witnesses across 3 territories. The gunfight was brief but vicious. Kowalski and 2 of his men died in the desert sand, while the survivors were taken back to face federal charges. The corruption that had plagued the railroad for years finally came to light, leading to reforms that made travel safer for everyone. "Feel better?" Elena asked as they watched the train disappear toward the horizon, carrying the prisoners and the bodies of the dead. "Feel useful," Nate replied. "For the first time since they put me out to pasture, I feel like I'm making a difference." Their partnership deepened into something more profound than business or convenience. They expanded the trading post into a way station that served travelers throughout the Southwest, providing not just supplies, but information, protection, and sometimes justice when the law couldn't reach. Together, they built additional rooms for travelers, established regular mail service, and created a network of trusted contacts throughout the territory. Thunder Mesa became known as a place where honest folk could find safety and dishonest ones would face consequences. "We make quite a team," Elena observed one evening as they sat on their porch, watching the sunset paint Thunder Mesa in brilliant reds and golds. The day's heat was fading, replaced by the cool breath of the desert night. "We make a family," Nate corrected, taking her weathered hand in his scarred one, "the kind that's built on choice rather than chance." At 56, Nathaniel Blackwood was no longer the broken-down engineer who'd been beaten and left for dead by corrupt colleagues. He was a businessman, a protector, and living proof that experience was more valuable than youth when integrity was at stake. The desert that had nearly claimed his life had instead given him purpose, partnership, and the chance to use his knowledge for something greater than mere survival. And Elena Vasquez had found something she'd thought lost when her husband died. Not just love, but belonging with someone who saw her strength as an asset rather than a threat. Who understood that building something lasting required both business sense and the courage to stand up for what was right. Together, they'd carved out their own piece of the American dream in the Red Rock country of southern Utah, proving that sometimes the people society discards become the ones who build the most enduring legacies. Their trading post became a landmark on the frontier, Thunder Mesa Station, where honest dealing and frontier justice went hand in hand. The rails still ran past their door, carrying passengers and freight across the expanding West. But now they carried something else as well. The knowledge that there were still places where honor mattered more than profit, where age was respected rather than dismissed, and where two people who'd been written off by the world proved that the best partnerships are forged in the crucible of shared adversity.